Right. So today we're going to dive into something pretty fundamental to, well, pretty much every relationship, right? Trust.
Absolutely, yeah.
We've got this guide here. It's called How to Build Trust in Relationships. But, we're not just going to like read it out to you.
Right.
That'd be boring.
Yeah, nobody wants that.
No. We're going for, stuff you can actually use.
Yeah.
Like real advice and hopefully, some aha moments along the way.
I think what's so interesting about trust is we all kind of assume we know what it is, but when you really get into it, it's surprisingly complex.
Yeah, for sure. So let's start with, you, the listener. Think about a time when, somebody really let you down, like that feeling in your gut, it's like a trust withdrawal.
Right.
Now think about the opposite, like someone totally came through for you no matter what. You get that feeling of relief.
Yeah.
That's a trust deposit. And today we're all about, making those deposits.
I love that analogy. That's great. And it really highlights that trust isn't just some kind of abstract idea, right? It's really tied to our emotions and that feeling of security.
Definitely. Now, this guide, it defines trust as confidence in someone's reliability, honesty, and integrity.
Okay.
Which, that's important,
Yeah.
But to me, that's just the starting point.
Right.
The real power of trust is like the vulnerability piece. It's knowing you can, let your guard down a little, show your true self, and you won't get burned.
Yeah, and that's where it gets really interesting, right? Because to be vulnerable with somebody, you have to believe that they're not going to exploit that openness.
Right.
It has to go both ways.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why trust is like the foundation of any strong relationship, I think.
Yeah.
Whether it's, your romantic partner, your best friend, or even your boss. Wouldn't you agree things just work better when there's trust?
Absolutely, yeah. The guide talks about how trust, it leads to better communication, more intimacy, and stronger bonds between people. But I actually think it goes even further than that. Trust allows us to take risks, be more creative, achieve things we wouldn't even try on our own,
Okay, that's a really good point. So, let's get practical. This guide lays out 8 steps for building trust.
Okay.
And some of them, honestly, I was kind of surprised by. I'm calling them like trust hacks, right?
Okay.
Because they're like little shortcuts to, building stronger connections.
Just hacks. I like it. Lay 'em on me.
All right, so hack number 1, honesty. Sounds pretty obvious, right?
Yeah.
But this guide, it emphasizes that it's not just about, avoiding those big lies. It's about the little ones too.
Right.
The white lies, the ones we tell with good intentions, thinking they're harmless.
And that's where things get a little bit tricky. Because while those, white lies might seem insignificant in the moment, they can actually wear down trust over time.
Oh, really? Huh. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Well, think about it. Every time you tell a white lie, you're basically saying that, the truth isn't welcome. You're putting up a barrier to open communication.
So it's like death by 1,000 paper cuts. Each little lie just chips away at the trust until, it starts to crumble.
Exactly. Which brings us to trust, hack number 2, open communication. And we're not just talking about talking here. We're talking about, really listening.
This guide really stresses that, real listening is about understanding, not just waiting for your turn to talk. But it's got to be a two-way street, right? If I'm always opening up and the other person's like, a closed book, that doesn't exactly build trust either.
You're absolutely right. Open communication only works if both people feel safe expressing themselves. And that's where consistency comes in.
Which is hack number 3, right? Being reliable, doing what you say you're going to do. If you're always flaking on plans, breaking promises, how can anyone trust you with, the bigger stuff?
Exactly. Think of it like this. Every time you follow through on something, you're making a deposit in that trust bank account. But when you're inconsistent, you're making a withdrawal.
So it's about building a reputation, right? Being someone people know they can count on. Okay, I'm getting this. What's the next trust hack?
All right, hack number 4 is all about respecting boundaries. This might seem a little less obvious, but it's really important.
You mean not pushing someone to do something they're clearly not comfortable with?
Exactly. Imagine your friend hates surprises. Even if you think a surprise party is totally harmless fun, ignoring their boundary, it kind of sends the message that you don't really value their feelings.
Okay, that makes sense. Respecting boundaries shows you care about their needs, their limits, and that builds trust. All right, what's next?
Trust hack number 5 might be the toughest one. Vulnerability.
Yeah, that one feels scary. I get why people would avoid it. But this guide really argues that it's the key to, like, deep connection.
It really is. Think of it like someone has to be brave enough to take that first step and open up. And when they do, it creates a safe space for the other person to do the same, and that deepens the trust between them.
It's like if I share something personal with you and you respond with judgment or ridicule, that's definitely going to kill the trust. But if you respond with empathy, even if you don't agree with me, that builds trust.
Exactly. Vulnerability is like a dance that requires trust to even begin.
Okay, starting to see how these hacks all fit together. What's the next piece?
All right, hack number 6 is mutual respect. This means valuing each other's opinions even when you disagree.
So it's not about always agreeing, it's about showing that you respect their perspective and you're willing to consider it.
Exactly. Which leads us right into hack number 7, patience.
Because trust doesn't happen overnight, right?
Right. Okay.
It takes time.
It really does, especially after a betrayal. Rebuilding trust is like healing a broken bone. It needs care and it needs time to mend.
So patience is key, both for the person who broke the trust and the one who was hurt. Okay, what's the last one? The last hack.
All right, the final trust hack is addressing past issues. The guide makes it clear that unresolved conflicts can really fester and they can erode trust over time.
So sweeping things under the rug is a bad idea.
It can be, yeah. Sometimes a sincere apology, it can be a huge deposit back into that trust bank account.
Because it shows you're willing to acknowledge past wrongs and work towards fixing things, right?
Exactly. It shows commitment to rebuilding trust.
Okay, so we've covered 8 actionable steps, these trust hacks, and honestly, I'm finding them pretty insightful. But even with all these hacks, the guide acknowledges that building trust, it's not always easy, you know? What are some of the challenges we might run into?
You're right. Even when we're trying our best, building trust, it can be tough. One of the biggest challenges, I think, is that fear of vulnerability.
Yeah, that's a big one. Putting yourself out there, it can be scary, especially if you've, been hurt before.
Oh, for sure. It's completely natural to want to protect ourselves from getting hurt again, right?
Right.
But the problem is, if we let that fear control us, we end up shutting ourselves off from really connecting with people.
So how do we get past that fear? Does this guide have any advice for dealing with that?
Actually, it kind of circles back to one of the trust hacks we talked about earlier, vulnerability. It's about taking that leap of faith, even if it's just a small one.
Baby steps, right? Not like spilling your deepest secrets on the first date or something.
Exactly. Start small. Maybe it's sharing a little worry with a close friend or telling your partner about something that's been bugging you at work, something like that.
And the key is how they react, right?
Yeah.
If they meet you with kindness and their understanding, that kind of reinforces the idea that vulnerability is okay.
Exactly. And it encourages them to reciprocate, which then deepens the trust between you both.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about dealing with the baggage from past betrayals? If someone really messed up your trust, it's hard to just, forget about it and move on.
You're right. Past experiences, they can definitely leave scars.
Yeah.
And it can make it really hard to trust again. That's where those rebuilding tips we talked about before become really important.
You mean acknowledging the betrayal, rebuilding slowly, all that stuff?
Yeah, exactly. Those are crucial steps in healing that trust. But sometimes they're not enough, If it was a really serious betrayal, getting some professional help can be really helpful.
Like talking to a therapist.
Yeah, exactly. A therapist can give you a safe space to process those past hurts and to learn new ways to trust again.
That makes sense. It's like you wouldn't try to set your own broken bone, right?
Right.
You go to a doctor who knows what they're doing.
Exactly. And just like with a physical injury, emotional healing, it takes time. So be patient with yourself and be patient with the process.
Okay, so we've talked about fear and past hurts. What about something a little less, dramatic, like miscommunication? It's crazy how often just misunderstandings can lead to a breakdown in trust.
It happens all the time, yeah. And this is where open communication, our trusty trust hack number 2, really comes into play. It's not just about talking. It's about actively listening, asking questions to clarify, and making sure you're both on the same page,
Active listening, that's something I'm really trying to work on. It's so easy to get caught up in your own thoughts and not really hear what the other person is saying.
Oh, for sure. It takes practice. But active listening means putting aside your assumptions and really trying to see things from their point of view.
And when you do have those misunderstandings, which you will, addressing them right away is key, right? Don't let them just sit there and fester.
Absolutely. Clear communication, it's like a disinfectant. It keeps those little misunderstandings from turning into something bigger.
Love that, yeah. Okay, last challenge I can think of. Unrealistic expectations. I think it's easy to expect perfection from people, especially the people we're closest to, you know?
Oh yeah, it's a trap we all fall into. But the truth is, nobody's perfect. We all make mistakes. And when we expect perfection from others, we're just setting ourselves up for disappointment and resentment, you know?
And that ends up hurting the trust, right? Because if you can never live up to someone's expectations, they're never going to really trust you.
That's right. So how do we deal with those unrealistic expectations? Well, it actually goes back to vulnerability.
Wait, really? Vulnerability again.
It all comes back to that, yeah. Accepting our own imperfections, it helps us to be more forgiving of other people's imperfections.
So if I know I mess up sometimes, I'm more likely to be understanding when someone else messes up.
Exactly. Trust is about accepting the whole person, flaws and all. It's not about finding someone who never makes a mistake. It's about finding someone who owns up to their mistakes, learns from them, and keeps trying to be better.
You know, it's interesting. So many of the solutions to these trust challenges, they all kind of come back to those basic trust hacks we talked about earlier.
It's almost like they're all different sides of the same, the same diamond.
Yeah. They all work together to create that strong foundation of trust.
Right. And it's important to remember that this is a lifelong thing. Building and maintaining trust, it's an ongoing process. It's not a one-time event.
So it's not a destination. It's more like a direction. I like that.
Exactly. And as we're going in that direction, it's helpful to remember that trust, it's a two-way street. You can't expect someone to trust you if you're not willing to trust them too.
It's about creating that kind of back and forth where both people feel safe and valued and respected.
Exactly. And that kind of relationship where trust is the foundation, it's really something special.
It is. So any final thoughts on this whole trust thing before we wrap things up?
Well, I think the main takeaway is that building trust, it takes time, it takes effort, and it takes being intentional about it. It's not always easy, but it's always worth it.
Because ultimately, trust is like the glue that holds all of our relationships together.
It allows us to really connect with people, experience real intimacy, and to create that sense of belonging and security in our lives.
I like that. Yeah. And with that, I think we've made it through another deep dive into the world of trust. Okay, so before we wrap up completely, I wanted to come back to that question we left hanging earlier.
Yeah.
You know, the one about taking action?
Yes.
It's easy to talk about these trust hacks, but the real magic happens when you actually, put them into practice.
Exactly. It's like we've given you all the ingredients for a delicious cake.
Right.
But now you have to actually bake it.
You got to bake it, yeah.
So to our listener, as you're going about your day today, I want you to think about this question. What's one small step you can take today to strengthen trust in one of your relationships?
Yeah, what's one thing you can do?
What's one gesture, one act of kindness, one honest conversation that you can start to really nurture that trust?
Maybe it's like finally calling that friend you've been meaning to catch up with, or, being upfront with your partner about something that's been bugging you, even if it feels a little awkward.
Right. Or maybe it's just acknowledging a mistake you made and saying, hey, I messed up. I'm going to try to do better next time. It doesn't have to be this big dramatic thing.
Right.
Sometimes the smallest actions can make the biggest difference.
It's like those tiny seeds we talked about, right?
Yeah.
Little care, little attention.
Exactly.
They can grow into something really strong.
And as we wrap up our deep dive today, I want to leave you with one last thought.
Okay.
Trust isn't just like a nice to have in our relationships, right? It's essential to our well-being, like for our own well-being and for society as a whole.
Now that's an interesting thought. Tell me more.
Think about it. When we live in a world where people trust each other, we feel safer, we feel more connected, and we feel more empowered to just be ourselves. It creates this ripple effect.
Okay.
When we trust others, it makes them more likely to trust us back.
So by choosing to trust, we're making the world a more trustworthy place.
That's exactly it. It's about creating a better, more harmonious world for everybody.
Wow, that's pretty inspiring. So let's all make that commitment, right? To be trustworthy people, to nurture that trust in our relationships, and to just make the world a little more trusting.
Yeah.
One interaction at a time.
One interaction at a time, that's all it takes. Because a world built on trust is a world where everybody can thrive.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into trust. Thanks for joining us. And remember, every little step counts. Until next time, keep diving deep.